All right, so this is the review for the Unit 2 test. And so just like in the last review, I'm going to go over and hit really the main ideas that you need to know on the test. So I'm literally going through the test question by question and hitting the main ideas. And of course, there's going to be maps and charts and stuff like that. So there's going to be questions in between the main ideas that I'm hitting. So first off, you need to know what subsistence agriculture is, or subsistence farming. And so that's where you're simply just producing enough just for yourself and your family to survive. So you're not able to grow enough in order to provide for anybody else or to sell for profit or anything like that. So you're just barely making it at that point. And then obviously there's going to be a lot of questions about culture, since that's a big part of this unit. And so with culture, you need to understand, why is it important to understand culture and different cultures and how that helps us not only communicate with one another, but understand one another and our different beliefs and practices in different parts of the world. And then another key term you need to know is assimilation. So assimilation is when, let's say, you were to move to another country, you were to move to Spain, and you started having dinner at the time that they have dinner there, so 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Well, that's an example of assimilation. You've adjusted to the culture that you've moved into. You've assimilated to it. Acculturation is when a culture decides to adopt something from another culture. So if people in India start wearing jeans instead of their traditional dress, and that's a form of acculturation, something coming in from another culture, an idea, and then the culture as a whole accepts it. Obviously, you should know the definition of culture itself, and then examples of what makes up culture, such as food, religion, family life, things like that. All are elements of culture. And then another key term, so there's a lot of vocab terms on here. So another key term we talked about was innovation, and that's when you take an existing technology and you make it better, improve upon it somehow. And so like the assembly line that Henry Ford created is a form of an innovation. The iPhone improving over time, or just the phone in general improving, from a corded phone to a cordless phone to a cell phone to the iPhone, that's an example of innovation. And then early civilizations, we talked about hearth. Hearth of civilization is where one is first started. And you do need to know that your early civilizations were all started along rivers, because you need the river, of course, for farming, for transportation, for food, obviously to drink and things like that. So all your early civilizations and early history are all around rivers. And then countries with a strong economy, we talked about this when we went over economics, are going to have a strong infrastructure, a well-developed infrastructure. People are going to be well-educated, know how to read and write. They're going to have plenty of natural resources to use and things like that. Per capita income is going to be high in those types of countries. Then you need to know the difference between traditional, communist, free enterprise, and mixed economy. So again, we talked about that in the economics notes. So traditional, again, remember that's just where you're bartering. Most people are farmers and there's not really much money involved. Communist is where the government controls everything, all the means of production. They decide what is produced, so there is no supply and demand. Free enterprise, which is the same as market, and that just means that supply and demand is what plays a role. It's what decides what is produced, which is basically ours. And then mixed / socialist. So mix is where you take some elements of command and market and you put them together. And so I give the example in class of how like the U.S. has the public education system, which is basically a form of socialism, but it's within a market economy. So we're going to have elements of socialism as well. Then you should know the difference between developed nations, newly industrialized nations, less developed nations, and really your just bare bones country. And so just know kind of the differences between those and what those look like. And then, of course, examples of infrastructure. I talked about how infrastructure is a really important term that you need to know. So again, anything that is needed for society to function, for the economy to function, that is necessary. And so things that aren't necessary, that just have to do with like entertainment or something like that, those aren't going to count as part of an element of infrastructure. It's something that we need in order for our society to function. And then for your religion, so it's mainly the 5 main religions you need to know your basics about: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. So you should know, the holy book for each one, obviously what they're called, like people that follow Islam are Muslims. The place that they worship in, is it a temple, a mosque, a church, a synagogue, and then the general region of the world where they are found, or at least where they started. You should know those. And then another question about innovation, some maps and charts. And then going back to human-environment interaction, remember So anything we've developed in order to survive in a certain area is going to be an example of human environment interaction. So it's not just merely humans interacting with the environment, it's doing it in such a way to kind of control the environment or to amend it somehow to allow us to survive in that area. All right, and again, as far as religions, I mentioned you need to know where they originated. So if you were to be looking at a map of the world, you should be able to pinpoint and figure out where that is, where they originated from. Then population pyramids, so just remember what it is that you can tell from a population pyramid. So obviously it shows age and sex distribution of a population. You can see if there's been a big event, like maybe an outbreak of a disease or a war or something like that, you would see that represented within the population pyramid. If there's been rapid increase or decrease of a population, so if there was obviously a war, it'd be a decrease. And then after that, after war's over, you usually see a baby boom, so you'll see a large increase in the population. So you can get a general idea of a country just based on the population pyramid. Also, of course, its basic infrastructure, you can tell from that. You can assume if they have a good healthcare system or not, a good education system or not, based on looking at population pyramids. I remember what the word diffused means, diffusion. So diffusion is the spreading of ideas or people or goods or anything like that. So religions can diffuse, ideas can diffuse, things of that sort. And then there's actually a couple of questions about push and pull factors, which I didn't really teach in this unit, so that one I'll probably just add in some extra points, honestly. I'm really going to teach it more so with the U.S. and Canada. So push and pull factors have to do with immigration. It's really simple. I mean, all it is a push factor is something that encourages you to leave a country. So like if you live in Mexico and maybe you want to leave because there's not enough job opportunities or the education system is just not good. And so that's a push factor. It's pushing you away. And then a pull factor is what is pulling you into another country. So, into basically it's going to be the opposite of what's pushing you away. So, lack of jobs in Mexico is pushing you away. So, the pull factor coming to the United States is better jobs or better education system, things of that sort. All right, you should know here. So again, knowing your different levels of economic activity, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. So remember, primary is gathering materials, raw materials, you're not doing anything with it. So picking cotton, but you're not doing anything. Secondary is when you take that cotton, you make a shirt out of it. So that's more kind of your industrial level. Tertiary is your service industry, like what I do as a teacher, doctors, lawyers, waiters, waitresses, all that kind of stuff is all tertiary. And then quaternary is your higher level, like CEOs and things like that, people that are running these giant systems that make a lot of money. So remember, if most of your country's at the tertiary level, your service industry, then your country's doing better. So like in the U.S., 75% of our people work at the tertiary level. All right, and then again, knowing your economies, know that your more developed countries like the United States, we tend to have a free enterprise economy. So there's a few different words you can use to mean all that. So market economy, free enterprise, capitalist, all that means the same thing. So it's a free market where you're able to buy and sell things as you wish and go into business if you want to. And of course, going to population, the population of the world is growing, and it's growing because the birth rate's higher than the death rate. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, more people are being born than dying, so therefore population is increasing. All right, you should know the difference between an urban and a rural area. So an urban area is a city. A rural area is the countryside. And so most people now are starting to move into urban areas, into large cities. All right, and again, knowing how democracy and market economy tie together. So generally, in a market economy, you're going to see a democratic system of government, and usually in a communist economy, you're going to see a more of a command economy or command government that really controls everything. All right, there's going to be a political cartoon as well. So just make sure with political cartoons, you really take time to read them and understand what it is they're trying to communicate. And then just go with that. All right, and you know why a lot of people choose to live in suburbs instead of a central city? So central city would be like Dallas, suburbs would be Flower Mound. So why do people choose to live in Flower Mound over Dallas, especially if they work in Dallas? And the most important reason is less crime. And so, I mean, there's other reasons as well, but really the biggest reason is there's less crime in the suburbs as compared to the central city. All right, and then looking at physical geography and how that dictates where people live. And so, generally speaking, human populations live along flat, fertile plains and river valleys and things like that, because it's easy to build roads and basic infrastructure. It's easy to connect everything together, transportation on rivers and things like that. And of course, you can farm. So, generally, flat, fertile plains is where you're going to see your bigger populations. All right, and then looking at the different types of governments, you should know the differences. So democracy, of course, is where people vote. Dictatorship, that's self-explanatory, I would think. A theocracy, remember, that means that the political leader is also a religious leader, and they're leading the country under religious law. So that's a theocratic government or a theocracy. And then totalitarian, remember, is where the government has total control over everything that's happening in your life. It's totally controlled by them. So, of course, a government where people have the most power is going to be a democracy. Anytime the government has more power than the people, obviously the people don't really have freedom. And then going back to religious beliefs, you should also know the basics of the religious beliefs. So like which religions are monotheistic, which religions believe in reincarnation, things of that sort. So you should have that down. All right, and then you need to know why people generally throughout the world are moving into urban areas. And so that's obviously looking for better jobs and things like that. And that's just been the shift worldwide where people are moving away from the countryside and moving into cities looking for a better standard of living. You need to know the difference between inexhaustible resources, renewable resources, non-renewable. So remember, inexhaustible is something we'll never run out of, basically. So, sun, wind energy, and then hydroelectric power, so water. And then renewable is something that we can take from the environment, but it will renew itself. So we can cut down a tree and trees grow back. And then non-renewable is something that once it's gone, it's gone. So oil is really the big one there, that once that's gone, we're done with it. All right, know how to read a map. You should definitely know by now where your continents are, so make sure you have that straight. Also, remember we talked about this as well, and we talked about this in Unit 1 a little bit too, like looking at language, knowing what a dialect is. So remember, a dialect is a certain way of saying something. So for Coke, maybe say pop, like I would like a pop. Or instead of y'all, you say you, or you guys, or something like that. All right, then looking at borders, you need to know the difference between natural and artificial boundaries. So natural boundaries, usually rivers. It's usually the lines are going to be wiggly. And then artificial boundary, generally straight lines, and that's going to be using latitude and longitude to create those borders. And then really lastly, just again, know how to look at your population pyramid. So if you see a population pyramid where it's really wide at the bottom with the younger group of people, and then it gets pretty narrow as you go up to adults, they're having a lot of kids and their population is growing. Whereas if you see a lot of adults and then it kind of funnels down to where the kids are, that means that population is shrinking because they're having less kids than there are adults. And so that means over time, as those adults grow old and die, there's going to be a smaller population to replace them. So overall, the country is shrinking at that point. So just know how to interpret population pyramids. All right, that's it for the Unit 2 test. So if you have any specific questions or anything, you can email me or just come into class for tutoring, and we'll go over whatever you need to go over. I'll talk to you later.